also had a powerful .308 caliber rifle and 2 Bella cleavers. They saw a Holden station wagon parked on the side of the road. It was a great chance of robbery because the windows were down and the driver was asleep in the front seat. 43-year-old manual labourer Ian Lamb was not expecting any trouble. As Crump looked behind the car to see if he was alone, Baker walked ahead to knock on the door. As the man sat up, Baker pulled the trigger and shot him in the voice box. For at least 10 minutes there was deadly silence. Then later on they collected about $30 from the man's pockets. They then untangled his feet from the brakes in the clutch and moved him to the passenger seat. They drove his car and left it in the middle of a bald hill road. The duo made sure that there was no evidence left behind. Just for a few dollars and fuel, they had murdered a man. Ian's car was still on the hill road. One of the truck drivers who happened to pass by noticed the blood in the car. As it was reported, a detective arrived on the scene shortly after. After doing some thorough investigations, they were able to identify the body as Ian's, but they had no suspects yet. At the same time, back in Barnaway, 9-year-old Adrian and 5-year-old Robbie were waiting for their mother to pick them up from school. After waiting for an hour, they managed to get back home on their own, but where was their mother? When Brian arrived, around 9:30 p.m, the kids told him that Virginia had not been home all this time. He grew concerned and asked her friends, but no one had seen her. He immediately called the police, and they began a massive search for Virginia. It was evident that someone had abducted her, but who could have done it? The police asked for a list of all the labourers who worked at the farm. Allan Baker was also on it. As of yet, he was only a person of slight interest. Just 4 days after Ian's murder, Baker and Crump decided to commit another robbery. This time they planned to break into a house. Since Baker had worked with the Morses, he thought that their property had the slightest degree of vulnerability. Parking from their house somewhere far, the two walked to the property carrying the same rifle. Virginia, who was unaware of what was going to happen next, was alone in the house. Without hiding their faces, the two criminals took her to the bedroom and blindfolded her. After searching the house twice, they found a .22 caliber rifle and $30 in cash. They forced Virginia out of the house and drove her in Morse's car to the abandoned police station where they had parked their stolen wagon. Leaving the Morse's car there, they drove near the Queensland border. You cannot even imagine how terrifying this whole ordeal must have been for Virginia. She was sitting in the back of the car, blindfolded, urging them to spare her life. On an isolated side track, they dragged Virginia out of the car and threw her near a tree. They tied her hands to that tree, behind her head, and her legs to 2 separate trees. They then brutally raped her one by one. For at least 22 hours, she had to endure such cruel atrocities Virginia's husband Brian spent his entire life making sure that these men never step out of prison. His pain never ended, but he tried to move on with his life by remembering only the happiest memories of Virginia. This case is so terrifying that the majority of details were not even revealed to the public. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Bye bye lovelies.